Well, thank you all so much for joining us on this Thursday afternoon / evening if you are on the East Coast. I'm really happy to be here with you all celebrating Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month here at Highline. Really this panel could not have been possible if it were not for my colleagues here at Highline, as well as Gregory, Cendana from Can't Stop, Won't Stop, and many other organizations. So I really want to take a second to thank everyone, but particularly thank our panelists for joining us today and sharing their knowledge. So today, I titled the panel Race Resilience and Resistance During COVID-19. I just wanted to bring us all together just to have a conversation about the current crisis and the kind of systemic inequalities that it's revealed and will continue to reveal unless we continue to push for action and for change. And a lot of this work is already going on, and you all are a part of movements for something better than what we're currently faced with today. So let's get into it. Before I get started, though, I want to mention that if you would like the ASL interpreter, if you need the ASL interpreter, please do pin them right now. We have 2 ASL interpreters, and there should also be closed captioning available. But if you could go ahead and pin the ASL interpreters right now. And we will pause maybe around midway, or maybe even every 20 minutes or so when the ASL interpreters switch. So first, I didn't introduce myself. I am Nikki Filler. Pronouns are she, her, hers, or they, them, theirs. I'm a faculty member at Highline College in Ethnic and Gender Studies, formerly known as American Ethnic and Identity Studies, or we're right now in a shift. Shifting our names, a period of transition. I've just been at Highline for a little less than 2 years now. So grateful for all of you for welcoming me to Highline and even on this virtual space. And also feel free to use the chat box. We'll go over some community guidelines in a second, but feel free to use that chat box for questions, and we'll leave questions. We'll also leave some time at the end for Q&A. So I'd like us to all take a moment to reflect on where we are located today, where we call home and where we work. Even though we are connected virtually, we're all located somewhere where we live and where we work. The place of Highline here in this picture, where many of us will eventually return to, is located on the unceded traditional territory of the Muckleshoot, Duwamish, Puyallup, and many other tribes who made their homes on these lands and along these waters. Let's pay gratitude and respect to the elders, past, present, and future, for they hold the memories, the traditions, and the culture of this area at Highline, which has become a place of learning for people from all over the world. Let's also recognize the continued struggles for sovereignty and decolonization led by Indigenous peoples here and around the world. And I want us to all think about our own positionalities in relation to struggles for sovereignty and decolonization, and to all be active participants or allies in these movements. So to begin with just some community guidelines to get us all on the same page, I'd like to thank the Black and Brown Summit and the Young Educated Ladies Leading, or YELL, community agreements, in addition to the PI Heritage Month Committee for sharing these community guidelines, as well as Kathy Nguyen. The first community guideline, this is a suggestion from Kathy actually, and I like this idea of a first draft. that we can, share what's on our mind, but also leaving space to revise it and come back and share those revisions. So, it's okay to share your first draft, your thought. This is a space for all of us to learn and to grow. Also, take care of yourself. If you need to leave or pause your video, mute yourself, take a step back, drink some water, eat some food. Feel free to do that. Oops. Use I statements only. This is particularly important when we are sharing our opinions. There are some instances where I think that we can use the collective we when we're trying to build a collective sensibility. Understanding that we is not do not assume that others share your views, and to use I statements when you are sharing your own perspectives or your own opinions, even about how to create a we. Confidentiality, the story stays, but the lesson leaves. So hopefully we're gonna, this will be a space for all folks to feel comfortable sharing their personal stories. That does not mean that you should share those personal stories with everybody else, but the lessons that you learn from those personal stories, please do share those out. And if I'm missing any of the details or any good examples for these community guidelines, as we are building community and in the spirit of community, feel free to pop on that chat box and be like, hey, this is how I think of this community agreement or community guideline. Impact over intent. Sometimes we say things and the impact that it has is not the intention that we had. And so recognizing that it's not only about the intent that you had when you made a statement or a comment or a connection, but how it was received and what impact it had on the person that Can I assign as a caption? Can I have one of the co-hosts help me with assigning the captioner role? All right. Ooch, ooch, nope. Ouch, oops, snaps. Vocalize your feelings. Sometimes it's difficult for us to articulate those in words, even though we're remembering that first drafts are cool, that's okay. So if something you're really feeling, go ahead and give it a snap, or you can even write snap, snap in the chat, or say, ooh, I don't really agree with that. And again, this is a space for learning and growing, so please do. Step up, step back. If you're finding that you are taking up a little bit more space, then, oh, yeah, snaps, thank you, Lupe. You can also use the reactions, the claps and the thumbs up. Those are also good tools to use in our Zoom platform. And if you are talking a lot, take a step back and leave some time for other folks to speak up. And if you haven't talked and thoughts are running through your mind, push yourself to step up. Silence is also okay. Now, I might take a drink of my coffee or tea right here and leave some room for silence instead of immediately trying to fill in the silence with words. Leave space for growth, and this is, at least for me, one of the kind of principal community guidelines that I think of. I think of leaving space for growth as, for some of us, this is the first time we're meeting. For some of us, this might be the first time we're even in a space like Zoom. So, this is, we can think of this as an entry point as a beginning, to have more conversations, to build community with each other outside of our hour that we have together. Oh, sorry. Don't yuck my yum. I feel like this is, I think of food with this, but I don't think it necessarily needs to be with food. Like if I'm really feeling something and, but you might not be, you don't have to yuck my yum. So yeah, go ahead, Nestor.
Yeah, I think this is also like, you know, just because something that you don't like doesn't mean that that person doesn't like. So, you know, try to be understanding of other people's perspectives or opinions as well. Just because you dislike someone doesn't mean that you necessarily have to, you know, I guess judge them on that. So I think just elaborating more on the don't yuck my yum.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. And also, Lupe, yeah, we can agree to disagree. Definitely. We're also leaving space for growth. If we all agreed, or it all seemed like we all agreed on everything, probably wouldn't be true. The space probably wouldn't be as open as we'd like it to be. And are there any other guidelines, any other suggestions or ground rules that would help make this space more collaborative, open? Okay, I am going to try to, okay, assign the host or assign the captioner. I'm gonna have to stop sharing. I don't think I can do this in. There we go. Thank you, captioner. Okay, so quickly, I just want to briefly introduce the panelists, and then when we get to the Q&A portion, I'm going to invite them to share a little more about themselves and their work and what shapes their perspectives on these issues. So first, this is by alphabetically, we have Gregory Cendana, president and co-founder of Can't Stop, Won't Stop Consulting, also the former executive director of the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance. Gregory was also, I learned this in our prep call on Monday, that Gregory was also on a part of the group that even developed the AANAPISI grant during the Obama administration, I believe. So it is really an honor to have Gregory with us today, and the tremendous amount of knowledge and experience that he brings. And so very, very grateful for you, Gregory, joining us today. And I hope that he can share a little bit more about his work as well. Kathy Nguyen, TRIO Program Manager and Academic Advisor here at Highline. Kathy, I've known Kathy for actually quite a long time, way back even before we were here at Highline. We actually met in California, at University of California, Santa Barbara, and Kathy has really helped me find community here at Highline and build community here at Highline. So she's really been a great friend, and I really appreciate having her in this space as well. Lynn Sam, she is an AANAPISI and TRIO student and the speaker of the caucuses for the Associated Students of Highline College, ASHC. Lynn is also the, I hope I can announce the recipient of the Student of the Year award at Highline College. Very, very well deserved. Lynn has been so active at Highline, not only in student affairs, but also bridging student affairs and academic affairs through her work on hiring committees for in a most stressful time. And so I really, really appreciate Lynn for being here today. Also brings an immense amount of knowledge and experience to this panel. Last but not least, Nestor Tupufia Enguerra Jr. He is an Asian American and Pacific Islander American Cultural Specialist for the AANAPISI program at Highline College. Nestor's also been a great friend and partner as I've been here at Highline. Nestor has, from the beginning, invited me into the AANAPISI program and to build relationships between faculty and students, and really grateful for his leadership at Highline. So here, those are really my kudos to all the panelists, and I'm excited to hear more about them, more from them in the Q&A. So we all have witnessed or observed some of the most devastating effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition to the increased animosity and violence directed at Asian people, specifically Chinese people or people who are perceived as Chinese. And I want to situate this, the current crisis, this crisis of a global pandemic and the racialized exclusion of people who are perceived or treated as foreigners, non-white foreigners in particular, into some historical and political context. So the spread of infectious disease to indigenous populations as a result of European and US colonization and the scapegoating of Asians as public health threats is definitely not new. So European empires and the United States as a settler nation grew out of the conquest and seizure of territory from indigenous peoples and the coerced and unpaid labor of non-white, non-Christian peoples, including through chattel slavery. Now, even after this picture right here is a cotton plantation in Fiji circa 1875. And to situate the spread of infectious diseases as part of the nation building project, as part of settler colonialism in the United States and in Europe, or through European settlers, after the Civil War, the US Civil War in the 1860s, white and European settlers sought new sources of land and labor, including in Fiji. They seized these lands through coercive and divisive tactics, recruiting and kidnapping Melanesians, who were the essential yet expendable labor that provided raw materials for the European markets. In just 1 year after Britain annexed Fiji, a measles outbreak hit the Fijian population, and 40,000 people died. The most of those were indigenous Fijians and enslaved Melanesians. Now, white supremacist ideologies under the guise of science were also used to explain the disproportionate deaths among non-white peoples. And again, a similar logic was used to justify the deaths and humiliation of Native peoples and Black peoples in the United States. So how does this relate to Asian immigration or the Asian diaspora? So in the United States and even in Fiji, Asians were recruited into these projects of national and global capitalist expansion and the racialized gendered hierarchies that they required. So it's like Asian immigrants entered into these spaces that were already highly racialized and gendered and were guided by white supremacist ideologies. When Chinese and later Japanese, Filipino, and immigrant males were recruited to meet the demands of the US economy in the second half of the 19th century, it was quote unquote Asiatic women who were singled out for exclusion on the grounds that they spread disease, and they were likely to become a public charge. And again, the same kind of justification for their exclusion was that Chinese immigrants had carried the disease. And these diseases, these Chinese diseases were, Chinese people were somehow immune to these diseases, but were going to be dangerous to white people. So this fear had targeted Chinese women, particularly sex workers, because they were believed to be transmitting Chinese diseases to white clientele. this is not the only example. There are numerous examples of Asian peoples or Asianness being associated with disease. So while the United States and European nations built their empires by conquering indigenous lands and spreading disease, it was those immigrants that were recruited to be a part of this project that were excluded on the basis of their race and even their gender. So now that we have a little bit of context, I want to suggest that it might not be so surprising that we're seeing a rise in anti-Asian discrimination and violence during COVID-19. Between just over about 2 months, there have been over 1,700 reports of anti-Asian verbal harassment, shunning, and physical assaults. And this is coming from the AAPI Stop Hate Reporting Center, a collaboration between the Asian Pacific Policy, APCON, as well as Chinese for Affirmative Action. And just to give an idea of what these various kinds of anti-Asian violence includes, I want to include some examples. In February, 2 Hmong men were denied a hotel room in Plymouth, Indiana, because they were thought to be Chinese. So here we see an example of discrimination and even civil rights violations. On March 14th, a Burmese family living in Midland, Texas, was stabbed in the face while shopping at a grocery store because they were viewed as Chinese and thought to be spreading the coronavirus. This is not limited to the United States. On April 12th, an Asian woman was punched in the face while waiting for a bus in Vancouver, British Columbia. And last Saturday, an Asian male at a Home Depot in Seattle was told, "Blink, open your eyes, go back to China." And again, there were over 1,700 reports. This is, hundreds of reports every week or every few weeks at least. More than half of those who have been assaulted or victims have been non-Chinese. And most of the individuals who report these incidents have been women. So there are different ways that individuals can report these incidents of anti-Asian discrimination and violence that don't have to rely on reporting this to the police, even though the Seattle Police Department has encouraged all individuals who are subject to this harassment and even violence to report it to the police. I encourage you to report anti-Asian racism to the Stop AAPI Hate Reporting Center. And this link is at the bottom. And these slides will be available at the end of the presentation. Okay, so quickly, some pre-existing conditions that I thought were also necessary to situate the current crisis. This recent public charge, kind of the reemergence of the public charge that we had just seen being used to justify the exclusion of Asian immigrant women. This bans the entry and the legal permanent residence of individuals who are deemed likely to use public benefits. So this discourages non-citizen immigrants from seeking essential services at a time when they most need it. Pacific Islander immigrants face the highest unemployment rates, and 4 out of 5 Asian American low-wage workers are immigrants. Over 25% of all Pacific Islanders and Asian Americans work in healthcare, service, and transportation occupations. These are those occupations that are thought to be essential, yet the treatment of those workers has seemed to suggest that they are also expendable. Just in Washington, and these are just stats, and they're not as good as our stories, right? What we need to do is, or what I hope we can do in this panel is provide some narrative to these statistics, but it's important to understand give us a broader picture. So I'm sorry, I didn't mention where these stats are coming from. This is from the Asian American Justice, I don't even know what they're called anymore. This is Advancing Justice as of 2019. This is the Asian Pacific American Alliance report that just came out in 2019. And a most recent report from CRAC, the Southeast Asian Resource
Action Center.
Action Center. Thank you, Kathy. And Asian Americans Advancing Justice came out with a report in 2020 that disaggregated a lot of the data that has hidden a lot of the unique barriers and challenges and attributions of Southeast Asian communities and ethnic specific communities. So 44% of Southeast Asian Americans reported limited English proficiency, and this is the language barriers are a major barrier to accessing essential services. This is even higher among Vietnamese Americans. About 40% of Cambodian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the state of Washington are low income. This is even higher among the Latinx population and the American Indian Alaska Native population. About 14% of Southeast Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders do not have health insurance. And 34% of undocumented students at Highline identify, I'm gonna stop using my mouse, as Asian or Pacific Islander, according to the undocumented student survey that was taken at Highline College. So there's a larger share of undocumented students who identify as Asian or Pacific Islander at Highline than there is really statewide or even nationwide. So we're seeing a concentration of undocumented Asian or Pacific Islanders here at Highline. And so when we think of what are the impacts of a crisis like COVID-19, and we see the mortality rates and the disparities by race and by ethnicity that are currently coming out, I hope we can use some of this knowledge that I tried to contextualize to help us understand these disparities. So some of the questions, these are questions that I posed to the panelists. The first question being, what are the impacts of this crisis? What impacts of this crisis have you witnessed or experienced? And related to that could be how you have responded or what kind of responses you've seen. So I'd like to pass it to any of the panelists. We can go in the order of the alphabetical order that I listed, if that would be helpful, or we can just do like popcorn. Folks can definitely respond in the chats as well. Please do.
I can start. I think, hi, my name is Kathy, she, her pronouns. I'm the TRIO program manager at Highline College with roots in AANAPISI. I think there's been a lot, but some of the things that I have noticed, especially helping students fill out unemployment forms or helping their families fill out unemployment forms, is just kind of recognizing how much of our family members work in low-wage jobs that have been impacted by this pandemic and how their unemployment checks are really little. I know someone who's getting $150 a week for unemployment, which that's not going to pay rent. Like that's not going to pay much of anything. And so kind of seeing, again, some of the expendability of low-wage workers, the lack of support. And I think also with that too, a lot of folks who are also seeing API immigrants as like public charges, folks who are just going to use public benefits. And so those are some of the things I've seen directly just working with folks trying to access unemployment and really struggling during this time while dealing with some of the discrimination of someone who's using the public service benefits that are there for them.
So I'm gonna talk next, talking about, sorry. My name is Lynn. I am Speaker of the Caucus of Student Government, and then I am also a student at Highline College. So when talking about the benefit charge, oh no, public charge, like Kathy just said, it happens to me personally. So I used to have a food stamp because right now I live by myself. I have a food stamp, and during the COVID-19, I just realized that I just figured out that I can become a public charge because I've been using the food stamp, and that might affect to my futures when I'm applying for a citizenships. During the COVID-19, I mean, I need a lot. I need the resource for food, but at the same time I am worried about my future status. So I just, like last month, I just terminate my food stamps because I feel like like there's a lot of barriers, and I'm just afraid that in the future something might, because being a public charge is not it's not good, and I am as an immigrant, I don't feel like like we just don't feel like the citizens here. There's a lot of things that I have to worry about. And yeah, and during the COVID-19, I've been noticed that there's a lot of things going on. And I'm talking as from my students' perspectives and as well as my own perspective as a student. Those include it's hard to study online. Some of us are still navigating the way that we learn in a virtual environment, especially for those who are studying in science class. It's not always easy. We have to deal with lab, and some people are not really good at science, and doing online classes is not, sometimes it does not work to some of the students, and sometimes being at home, there's a lot of like we have to change our environment, study environment, and study from home itself, we do not, I know there's a lot of resources that are available online, but sometimes it's kind of tough for us to spend our time doing our classes, taking care of our families, um, and stay at home, and then stay connected to the resources that are available too at the same time, because it's really hard to balance our balance our work time, study time, and family time too. And there's a lot of things going on. A lot of students are stressed out a lot because we lost the connection to the outside world, as well as doing online classes not really been easy. Some of the students' family, they lost a job, and like as Kathy said, even though there are unemployment check or anything, but for example, my mom, she's an immigrant, and my brother and my siblings are immigrants, and like we've have been through some problems currently, and my mom didn't get the stimulus check, and I know there are some people um, who lost their job, but they find it's really difficult to get the resources to get helps to file for unemployment. And it's also tough for some students who are graduating this year and are willing to the work to work, but since the COVID-19 is going around, job opportunities are not really open to those who are graduating this year. And as I know, unemployment only pay for those who already work for a long time ago, but for those who are looking for a job because they're graduating are having a hard time because not a lot of job opportunities are open for them. Yeah. And I would say that there's are a lot of problems that happens with immigrants as well as refugees, where their English is not really good. And especially I work with a lot of Cambodian folks. I am an interpreter and I am a trust messenger for Census 2020 for Khmer folks too. And I know we have a lot of, I mean, a large number of refugees who are elderly and they don't speak English. So it's been a tough time for, especially for Cambodian community.
Thank you so much, Lynn, for sharing that. It's very multidimensional, the problem. It's not only on one side that there are barriers, but it seems like it's multiplying right now.
I can go next if that's okay. Yeah, I think some of the main impacts that I saw as a Pacific Islander, I mean, there's a lot. And I think the main ones that come to my mind so far is that, one of the biggest thing is that, people forget that there are Pacific Islanders. I think that's one of the things that that a lot of PI community members are very concerned about, especially when it comes to like testing and things like that. Like a lot of them don't have access to it. And especially when it comes to like the territories that are part of the US, like American Samoa, then no one's even thought about sending testings to, far off territories like that. Another impact that I saw is that, a lot of PIs, are working in unsafe environments. A lot of them are those essential workers that needs to be, they need to go to work in order for in order for everything to run. And so a lot of them are concerned, about the unsafe environments. And then another thing is that for a lot of Pacific Islanders, they fall into like those categories that are highly impacted by COVID. So like they have a lot of health problems that run not only with themselves, but with their families. So a lot of people are, or a lot of Pacific Islanders are, afraid of that and are heavily concerned about that. And of course, there's also like access to like internet and to school. A lot of PIs are of low income. A lot of low income populations, don't have access to a lot of Wi-Fi's and a lot of internet services. And so that makes it very difficult for schools. And for many Pacific Islanders, a lot of them live in very like family home style. So they have like multiple generations living in a household. And all of them are still working. And so you have like 5 or 6 kids at home trying to do all their homework at the same time, and and it's all eating up the bandwidth of their internet. Then of course you have the parents in the background, yelling at them and telling them to go do your chores, but not realizing that they're taking classes right now or they're in the middle of a test. So I think those are some of the impacts that I personally witnessed as a Pacific Islander.
Well, thank you to everyone for sharing. Hapade and Kumusta. My name is Gregory Cendana again. And to build on what folks have shared, because I think that the stories have been, it's been good to hear the stories, and I think a good grounding for the conversation today. But I think to provide even some broader context, there are more than 40 million people now who are unemployed in the country, which is the highest number of unemployment since the Great Depression, so in quite some time. And I know that doesn't even include folks who are undocumented or folks who maybe haven't even applied for unemployment benefits. And so it's likely that number is much, much higher. And I know that there's been lots of talk about the stimulus, and I know one group that continues to be left out is the undocumented community, who didn't even qualify for, who not only didn't qualify for certain benefits within the stimulus, but people like Secretary DeVos, the Department of Education, have been intentionally finding ways to remove or take out particular benefits and support that they may have gotten in other ways. And so we know that immigrants, and particularly undocumented immigrants, are being hurt at even higher levels during this time. My dad and my aunts are also essential workers right now, and they've continued to go to work. And my aunts are nurses, and they've been sharing a lot about how as they hear more about other colleagues and folks at other hospitals, that not everyone even has the proper PPE, the proper personal protective equipment, to be able to serve the growing number of folks who need testing and services because maybe they're contracted the virus or have symptoms of the virus. And so until testing is actually accessible and open to folks all across the country, we may not actually have a full sense and full scale of the impact that the virus is having, even though we're seeing staggering numbers, both in terms of deaths, folks who are contracting it, and the other ways that it's impacting folks. And I think the last thing I'll just share, at least on this question, is that, at least for me personally, and I know that it's important to kind of name this, is that there's many ways that this pandemic and this global health crisis is impacting us, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, and in addition to it being Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, it's also Mental Health Awareness Month. And I think to just name that we are going through this together, that we must have more grace for ourselves and grace for our each other, because in addition to what we've already had in terms of responsibilities, we now have this additional burden of anxiety and stress. And so I just want to name that to folks, because I think especially people within Asian American and Pacific Islander communities, sometimes there's this extra burden put on to us, as it's kind of mentioned even by some of the previous stories by our parents and families. And so we have to just remember that there's this broader struggle that we're collectively going through now. And it's okay to take the time you need. It's okay to not be as productive as we were before the pandemic. It's okay to need some time to rest and to be loved and feel loved and to nurture and to be nurtured. I just want to name that because it's important, and it's an important reminder. And as racism and as we continue to experience the pandemic, I think we will need those reminders, especially from our people.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that reminder too. I mean, I feel the stress and the pressure to continue to produce and continue to be there for other people. And it takes a toll. It takes a toll on my mental and physical health too. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. And I hope other folks also are kind to themselves as well. So should we move on to the next question? Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right. So how should Asian or Asian Americans respond to anti-Asian harassment, bias, and physical attacks? How can Asian communities build solidarity with other communities that have been targeted by racist violence? This is a huge question, and a question that we should continue to talk about after this conversation. But I'm going to stop talking so other folks can.
I think it would be good to kind of have this question be a conversation, because I think as folks were sharing earlier, I was like, yes, I want to really reaffirm what you were saying. I really felt and resonate with a lot with what folks are saying. So I just want to say maybe one thing for folks to kind of jump off on. This feels like a small thing, and I think I want to be intentional and purposeful with sharing this small thing, because I think microaggressions can lead to greater, bigger macroaggressions, right? And so back in January, before everything was really wild and unprecedented, I was at the Bangladesh farmer market with my dog and my partner. We were just walking around, wanted to just, check out the farmer's market and enjoy some things. And this woman came up to us and was like, "Oh, where's your dog from?" We adopted our dog from a shelter, but we took a DNA test and we found out that she was a Chinese village dog. And so when she had asked us, I was like, "Oh, she's a Chinese village dog." And right when I said that, she just booked it. She walked away so fast. And at that time, that's when we started to hear a little bit about the news about the coronavirus. And so at first, my partner and I just kind of laughed. I was like, does she think she's going to get the disease from our dog? Our dog is the cutest dog in the world. And our dog is, and as a joke, we're like, our dog is a US citizen. How dare she? And at first, we thought it was kind of funny, right? But then I think as things have really snowballed into everything that's happening, it kind of reminded me a lot about my own personal reaction to harassment and physical attacks is oftentimes thinking about within the framework of flight, fight, or freeze, and oftentimes I freeze. And so in that moment, it was like, oh, that's just funny. It's January. There's no stay-at-home order. I'm at a farmer's market. But I think as I was thinking about this question, it kind of reminded me of like, what if I was in a space that was more unsafe or more dangerous, right? I've been in spaces where physical and emotional violence is really prevalent. And so I think now as I'm reflecting on everything that's happening, I definitely feel a lot about like, I don't even know how I would respond to that, right? And I think my initial response would be to freeze, to kind of be scared and stuck in that moment and be unsure of what to do. And so I'm really curious to hear about other folks too, about like how they think they would respond in the moment, and also how they would encourage folks to respond to harassment.
Yeah, I think it's a tough question as well. And please, people, feel free to unmute yourself and jump in. We're trying to make this like a conversation as much as possible too. But I think for myself, I was trying to make sure that, we're in a safe, that, you can respond safely, I think. Because, I think in these times, it's crazy. People are acting more abnormal than usual. So I think make sure that you're safe. At least that's what I would do. And, I feel like Asian communities and, all people of color communities have always been trying to build solidarity and been trying to come together. And I think that it's more important in times like these. And so, yeah, I mean, I know as from a Pacific Islander perspective, we always feel like we're the marginalized of the marginalized kind of thing. And so we appreciate when we can do partnership, especially with Asian communities, by giving us some space to speak for some of our issues as well. And, to see where our commonalities and, our differences is, and see what ways we can work together. So like doing stuff like this, like similar talks and workshops like this, where we can come together, talk about our similarities and differences and how we can view each other and help each other in many different ways. So I think that's one way to build solidarities, not just with Pacific Islander communities, but like African or Black communities, Latinx communities, and many different types of communities that we have out there.
Yeah. I just wanted to quickly say I just found this sweatshirt in my closet, but I'm wearing a shirt with Yuri Kochiyama and Malcolm X that says Asians for Black Lives, because I think cross-cultural, cross-racial solidarity is really important. I think bouncing off what Nestor said too, like talking about safety, is that like a lot of our response to like harassment and bias during time is also probably informed by our previous experiences. And so Nikki probably knows this, but at UCSB, she and I were both there when there was a school shooting by a man who specifically hated women and specifically hated his Asianness as a multiracial man. And so ever since that moment, I also know that from myself too, that it's hard for me to react when I am experiencing harassment, bias, or physical attacks, because I'm immediately drawn to that moment when I was an undergrad and thinking about like, are my friends okay? Is my community okay? There is this man who specifically hates me. He hates women and he hates Asianness. He hates me. And so I think it's also important to think about like, how have our past experiences informed our reaction to these things? Because it does, right? Like that's something that I am still healing from, even though, I'm physically okay, but that was something that really shook my community and really shook my sense of safety, especially with other folks that I thought I would identify with.
I think to build off of that, I think one thing that I reflect on, and something that comes up a lot when I talk with different communities and organizations, is kind of the idea of policing, and how people, some people ask, like, is the best thing for me to do is call the police? And I think it's important to bring up the nuance in a conversation around the police actually hasn't been a safe place, and for many communities and for many people has brought on additional violence, and in some case deaths to communities of color, particularly Black communities, but I know Southeast Asian and Pacific Islander communities are also disproportionately impacted by policing. And so I actually offer and encourage folks to really reimagine what it means for safety and security, and what are alternative models in terms of transformative justice practices that we can take on. And so when I think about what we can do, I think about using the concept of pods, which was an idea that is being shared a lot by the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective, which I know is one of the resources that will be shared with folks. But for folks who aren't familiar with pods, a pod is really made up of people you would call if violence or harm or abuse happened to you, or people that you would call on if you wanted support and taking accountability for violence. And it's really built off of this idea that community safety, and that we can work together and be in community together and build practices, which if you talk to a lot of indigenous folks or folks who native folks will share that that's actually a lot of what safety looked like before colonization and before folks violently and took over different land. And so I think the reality is we actually know a lot of these practices. Our culture, our heritage knows a lot of these practices, and we kind of have to relearn them and unlearn some of the other things that we've learned through some of these systems. And so I would definitely name that. And then I would also say that, a simple way to think about it is like, how are we also making sure that we're bringing more joy to our world? One thing that I do, I'm a dancer, and I recently started a TikTok. And so one thing that I like to say is like, one offering I have to the world is like giving more people joy through dance and through performance and art. And I know that there are other things that we may be able to offer, but I think that this is an interesting way to also say, like, as a community, what are things that we can do to bring joy, bring happiness to ourselves, to our families, and to our communities, which I think could be a broader way that we address some of the violence in the world.
Hi, my name is Lay Masina. I just wanted to piggyback off of what everyone said, and I am in complete agreement. I've personally dealt with a lot of this, not personally alone, but like through my husband, nephews, through my community. And it's a really loaded gun question, but I wanted to just answer it just for what it is. How should Asians or Asian Americans respond to anti-Asian harassment, bias, and physical attacks? My first advice, because this is what I tell my nephews and everyone here is family, is you have to make sure first you're safe. If you're not with someone, you have to understand that in response, that you do not feel that you're safe. Your safety is first, regardless what needs to happen with all the bias, racism, your safety is first. If removing yourself is what needs to happen, then that needs to happen. Because as a Pacific Islanders, my nephew looked like man-childs. Everyone's first response is usually violence, or they're violent. I always tell them, if you don't have time to respond and call the cops, go live. Go live on your Facebook, go live on any social media. So there is evidence, or we can see what's happening, because response might show up later and time might be of an essence. I tell my nephews to just go live, because I prefer knowing than them feeling like they're alone and they're just being attacked. And I don't want them to immediately respond in violence. And their safety is first. So that's my advice, because it's what I give my nephews and what I tell my husband, because he's twice my size and he's not violent, but that's everyone's response. And right now, racism, they don't care. It's what they think or they perceive who we are as Asian Americans or Pacific Islanders. And another thing is, how can Asian communities build solidarity with other communities? Is, as a person from another community of Pacific Islanders, is for us, when we see it, say something. To show allyship through saying something when you see something happen, speak up and step up when you see something happen. And we do that a lot. And for us, when we see that happen, being a bystander, it's just a contributing factor to the problem. But building allyship in the community and knowing that we stand with Asian Americans through this, because allyship really helps Um, it really helps carry the message that what's happening is not okay, but we stand with Asian Americans, and that's just an advice. And that's how I wanted to share, because as Pacific Islanders and because of how we are built, usually the response is violent for our kids or for our male parts, or they automatically think that the only thing that could respond to someone of that build, of that caliber, is violent or a gun. And our kids don't have the opportunity to think twice or whatnot. So that's the one thing that I've asked is think of your safety first. If you don't have time to call the cops, go live. And if you have time, call someone to hear what's happening. Ask somebody to call the cops. So these are some of the advices that I'm giving that has helped, and it's some that I've given to my own family and my students as well. But that's how I wanted to share with our group today.
Thank you so much, Lele, for sharing that.
I don't want to speak too much, but I just want to say one thing. I think it is inappropriate for us to respond to anti-Asian harassment by saying, I'm not Chinese. Like, we're not out here trying to scapegoat other folks. That is the opposite of solidarity. And I think as folks who have experienced perpetual foreignerism and being an outsider, like, that's not what our role is right now.
Yeah, and I think one thing I would add, I appreciate that. I put in the chat that solidarity is our survival. And I think that it's important that we also think about, in addition to the anti-Asian racism and violence that's happening, that there is also still disproportionate impact of COVID-19 and this pandemic on other communities of color, and particularly Black folks. And, you know, I want to name folks like Breonna Taylor or Ahmaud Arbery, who were lost at the hands of the state of the police. And you know, while we are facing kind of increased experiences of racism, that the number of deaths, there's a disproportionate number of deaths. And so I think we should also just be mindful of, like, how are we continuing to build solidarity with other communities while censoring and supporting folks within the community who are facing those incidents. And so I think it's important to talk about that. And while I know many folks, especially on here, I think are doing that, I think there have been some in our community who have also have advocated for or caused harm to other communities. And of course, because of white supremacy, Asian Americans are used as a racial wedge. And so people have to, you know, there's additional work that may need to happen to help people understand and heal, to say, you know, while there may have been past experiences, that this is why, and this is part of the learning that we have to do for ourselves and others in our community, but also as we are doing that building with other folks in other community and other people of color and other marginalized communities as well.
So, one thing that I do in order to stay connected to Asian Pacific Islander community, to build a solidarity, because at a time, during this time, I mean, I do not know how to stay connected. So one thing that I do is just subscribe to the email list of different Asians and Pacific Islander organizations on their website, and then give them my email. And then that way, whenever they have more news, they have updates, the actions that they're currently doing, I can see their updates, and we can see stay connected and involved by that way. Just want to share what I'm doing.
I appreciate that. I also wanted to mention that there are bystander trainings that Hollaback and Asian American Advancing Justice have put on. I believe A. Seychelles, thank you, A, included the link to the Hollaback bystander intervention training. And so these are very practical strategies, things like what Lele mentioned, making sure that you're safe. And if you witness something happen, that you make sure that maybe go stand with a person that's being harassed, go check in with them, and then report it to the AAPI reporting center as well, because these are the tools that we can use to not only name what's going on, but also use this to build solidarity. It's not only white folks who are, harassing Asians or attacking Asians. And I think we should step back for a second and think about the kinds of systems that have been put in place that result in mass incarceration and mass deportation, that also result in the same kind of racialization of Asians as perpetual foreigners, as disease threats, as threats to national security, as threats to public health. And what these kinds of narratives do, what do? They put us against each other, when, we will be stronger and more impactful when we can work together to dissolve the kind of structures that are pitting each other against one another. Very similar to the importation or the recruitment of Asian laborers, as the United States is a settler colonial nation. Would anybody else like to chime in here and share their thoughts on how they might react, or some suggestions about how Asian communities can build solidarity with other communities that have been targeted by racist violence?
One of them is when you go in public, to go in groups. It's always good. I mean, we know what's happening out there, and it's better safe than sorry, is to try and go in groups, or ask someone or one of your friends when they're going to go to the store, so you have someone there with you. That's just an advice that I give to my nieces and nephew, because they're mixed and you can't tell they're someone. You can only look at them and see they're Asian, but always go in groups.
Thank you, Lady.
Hi, my name is Manu. Pronouns are he.
Hey, Manu. Oh, I'm not sure I think we lost you, Manu. Manu, can you hear
me now?
Oh, yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. Bad connection.
Okay.
So, like I said, thank you for hosting this. But my advice would be, so we have like different identity clubs, different identity groups, but we always operate as one. So we have Black Student Association, we have Latinx leadership, we have MSA, and we have Indigenous, the Native American leadership club. But I mean, they're all clubs on their own, but we always get together as one, and we are like one big community. So pairing up like that, I mean, it helps build that community around each other. And I feel like that is one of the best ways to be in solidarity and also avoid, some of these situations. I mean, it's easier to communicate when these situations occur.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I definitely want to echo the need to do this work, not only when we are in a crisis. The work has to continue at all times. And I think what we have seen during this crisis is perhaps revealing of the kinds of work that is ahead of us. And, you know, I've been really, really inspired by all of you who have come to this call and shared your stories, and even just listening, that suggests to me that we're all willing to do this work. Okay. I'm going to go to the next question. What are some of the current policies and practices that perpetuate the marginalization of the most vulnerable in our communities? And what are some alternatives? Gregory mentioned some already, like pods. So the practices of mass incarceration and anti-Black violence that have, by the police, but also by everyday folks, that the current system of the so-called criminal justice system is not working for many in our communities. So pods are a great alternative. I wonder, what are some other current policies and practices and some alternatives to those?
I'll jump in here, plus to say hi to people. Hi, everybody. I'm Helen Byrne at Highline. I'm in the mathematics department.
Hi, Helen.
Hi, thank you so much. And thank you, May, for your follow-up email. I think that triggered me. I went, oh, yeah. One of the things that I am just perpetually amazed at is how in my area, which would be like math and science, there's still so much ignorance around the challenges that, Asian students face, the stereotypes that still persist. And it's the model minority myth. It's kind of like 101 stuff that most people, I would expect, would know by now. So I'll just connect this directly to our current situation where we're doing remote teaching or online, and there's definitely a lot of concern about students who might be needing more support. But I'm not seeing the Asian communities always included in that discourse. And I'm not saying from like Highline administrators, but when boots are on the ground, there are other student subgroups that seem to be maybe just more on the radar screen for needing additional support. So that's one kind of a practice that I feel like perpetuates the marginalization of students from the different Asian subgroups. And so I'd like to see more accountability to that group. That group is diverse, I understand that. So what are alternatives? I just still feel like there's just so much that needs to be done to help what is predominantly white math and science faculty understand the discrimination that Asian students face. And that's my work to do. That's not anyone else's work. So I just throw that out. And thank you for holding the session.
Yeah, thank you for that, Helen. Yeah, Lynn, do you want to jump in?
Yeah. So currently, I've been working with a lot of low-income family as well as low-income students. So one thing that I think might be like problems for them is some of their family members, they do not know about the resources that are available to them because of the language barriers as well as the loss of connection to the outside world. So one of the alternative way is for us to help spreading the word when there are resources available for them. For example, like the learning community at Highline College, when there are some, but I know currently they're doing a good job when there are resources available for students. They send out the email, let students know. However, I just want to like we together as well as the program, learning program at Highline College. So when there are resources available,
like be there, like to not only to spread the word, but also help them to access the needs as well as to access to the resources too. And yeah, because I feel like there are a lot of people who do not know how to do this and this, how to fill out the applications, or they don't know the resources available to them because of the language barriers, or because they lost the connection to the outside world. So I think um, having like the ability to help them access the needs and know what are some of the resources available to them would be really great.
Yeah, so we need in-language services, in-language resources. And we need to know, right, we need, as Helen mentioned, we need disaggregated data to know even what languages need to be provided. And then also people working at Highline to be able to communicate to our students and their communities about those resources that are available. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and those resources, it's not necessarily that available at Highline. It can be like the resources that's funded by federal program or outside organizations.
Yeah, and also like it's hard for me even to just keep up with the constant changes, the policy changes under our current administration. So even just know your rights, and information about what are the rights of undocumented people, what are the rights of immigrants who do not have legal citizenship status, but they might be legal permanent residents or here on visas. There has been constant policy changes and constant attacks.
Yeah.
So institutions like Highline, like our local governments, like local community organizations, addressing those issues full on, I think.
Thank you, Nikki.
Yeah, and to build off of what Nikki said as well, like talking about like, I guess, national policies, or especially here in the US, I think another thing is like healthcare. I know a lot of the Pacific Islanders who are, I guess, because there's many Pacific Islanders who are undocumented, but they're not the term undocumented because a lot of them kind of came in here legally and then lose their visas. And so they fall into this gray area where they don't qualify for any they don't qualify to be considered undocumented, and they don't qualify to be, anything related to US kind of thing. So they fall in this very small gray area. And so they can't really have access to healthcare. And then there's also like an example of the Compact of Free Association, which is made up of the made up of the Federated States of Micronesia, Marshall Islands, and also Palau. These are kind of like they're free independent territories, or free independent nations, I mean, but they're still associated with the US, and the US kind of like overlooks them kind of thing. But a lot of them are here in the US, but they don't really qualify for these healthcare. But recently, in Washington State, there's a bill that was passed that allowed them here. But in many other states, they're still not considered, I guess, part of the US, or like in this weird immigration gray area where they can't qualify for like healthcare and things like that. And so I think that's one policy, trying to address like the current health care policy, especially when our communities are very vulnerable to, coronavirus. And especially nowadays when many people in the Pacific Island communities and also Asian American communities are like losing their jobs and therefore losing their healthcare as well. So I think something that needs to be done, or hopefully that will be done. I don't know of any alternatives that are feasible, but I think those are some of the things that should be kept in mind.
I appreciate you lifting that up, Nestor, because I think that that's important for people to kind of understand, because I believe it's important that we have universal health care that's not tied to employment, that's not tied to immigration status, because in addition to all of the high numbers of unemployed folks, because in many cases, people who will lose their health care if they lose their jobs, as you noted, but undocumented folks don't even have access to even Obamacare right now. And so I think it's important that we lift that issue up and talk about some of the places like Australia and Canada and other places that actually have universal health care and have been able to find a way to cover those costs for folks. And I think especially in this pandemic, things like healthcare and people are actually really feeling the extra gaps in healthcare and in other systems. And so I think this is also an important moment to kind of talk about that and help people understand that there are alternatives and there are other models that the US can actually follow in other countries and find ways to be able to pay for it. And I think this is particularly important because, you know, one of the other issues that I think I'll just mention is kind of the influence of money in politics. Like there are many people who are literally worth billions of dollars, you know, like the head of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, and they don't pay the same amount of taxes as many of the rest of us do. And so I think it's an important conversation to have because there are people who are still profiting off of people who are essential workers, profiting off of people wanting or feeling like they need to find other ways to get access to different services and food and whatnot. And so I think it's important to kind of talk about that and to name that it is possible if people actually pay their fair share of taxes. And we thought about other ways to get additional income to be able to provide some of these basic and necessary services for folks to just live life with dignity and respect and healthy and free.
Hi, I just wanted to echo on what kind of bits and pieces on what everyone spoke on. So in response to what are some current policies and practices that perpetuate the marginalization of most vulnerable in our communities, and what are alternatives? So one that's currently happening is the census. Participating in the census helped to segregate the data that is being used to promote these policies, and that would also help funding for different nonprofits and allyship, and helping promote our families to take on this census so we're able to tap into some of the resources that would help us. And helping educate our communities would help. Building allyship with our African American groups because they're paving a lot of ways in which we are benefiting. Some of the battles that they are going through is what we also face, but Pacific Islanders being 1% of the 1%, building solidarity helps with allyship. And another way is to do outreaches and working alongside and hearing a lot of our Micronesian community. COFA, just like Nestor said, that is very vital. And if in the chat box, I've actually put in the state bill, and it's 5274. One of the ways that we can help those current policies that are on the floor, or any policies that will help our communities, you can actually call your representative. You can call your senator, and it literally takes less than 5 minutes just to say that I am a resident in your county, and this is my address, and these are the bills that I think you should stand for, and these are things that we can do. And helping these House bills and Senate bills that benefit our communities, these are ways for us to actually help perpetuate change in policies, because we can petition all we want, but unless these are in policy, in the law, in written law, it really won't help our message perpetuate for the future generations. Helping with allyship means also finding out what policies that they're working on that'll also help us, that'll also benefit us, because some of the segregated data works on pushing policies, but as Pacific Islanders, we don't have enough desegregated data. So some of these policies are harder to push, but with allyship, it's been going really great. And helping verbalize some of the COFA and what they're experiencing with healthcare, all it takes is just calling your representative and your senator, and just saying that, they actually document it. and they have to follow up on what bill you're talking about. And they're going to have to pull up the stats on their county, in their city, how many Pacific Islanders live here, and what is these policies on. And these are things that we can do to help policies and practices, and to help bring those policies to life by sharing it on your social media, sharing these policies and explaining how they can benefit Pacific Islanders, Asians, how they can benefit our communities. These are ways we can do that, is being more verbal about things that actually impact us immediately as marginalized communities. Um, those are some alternatives, but census helps. And for the COFA, that's the Senate bill, and just calling your representative and senator is one way to do it. And also voting helps everyone.
Yes, absolutely. I just want to highlight a few things in the chat and things that Lele mentioned and other folks have mentioned to just reiterate. It's important to take the census, extremely important to take the census. Not only do these provide federal funding, but it's also determines our number of representatives in each state. And elected officials respond to their constituents, particularly when there's a lot of people behind it. So please do call, tweet, send an email. They have little spreadsheets that they check a mark every time someone supports or opposes a particular bill or plan. And it's important for Asian Americans to support those bills like COFA, whether or not you feel like you will be directly impacted from it. This is a way that we can demonstrate our allyship and solidarity.
Yeah, I want to add on that too, with the census, because I work with as a census trust messenger. So everybody everyone who live in the U.S. on April 1st can fill out the census regardless of their immigration status. So even though they are not U.S. Permanent resident or citizen, they although they do not have a social security number, even they come here to live illegally, they are also able to fill out the census, because in the census form they do not ask for a social security number, they just ask for names, the address, and also the census barrier cannot show or reveal each person who fill out the census identities to other people. It's the law, so it's okay if you are not U.S. Person, if you are not you do not have a social security number. Everybody have to fill out the census, and don't worry if because some people I know, they're because of their immigration status, they don't dare to fill out the census. They're afraid somebody gonna come to their house and then ask for where you come from, or you are legal to live here or not. So it doesn't matter who you are. If you live in the United States on April 1st, you are all required to fill out the census. And you might get the mail to your house. You have a code to go online and fill out the census. But if you do not have the code, you also can fill out the census. If you go to the link, and then there will be the link where it said if you don't have the code, you can click on that link, and then they just need your address, and that's it.
That is perfect. That's perfect, Lynn. Super helpful too. Thank you so much. I want to be mindful of the time. We still have some more questions, but I want to take at least a few minutes, if we can, if folks can, to ask questions of our great panelists today. We have covered a lot, and I look forward to more panels at Highline, outside of Highline, and really just conversations with you all. But if you do have some questions that you'd like to pose to our panelists or to just the entire group, if you could send those in the chat or just unmute yourself and feel free to ask.
Hi there, everyone. I'm Pedro Aguirre. I'm here with you from San Francisco. I wish you all well, and hopefully we'll get through this pandemic. My question to the panelists is, what do you think should be done in terms of, the approaches that the media, the mass media in our country has towards groups of different backgrounds, especially in this case, the Asian American community, the Pacific Islander community? What should be done to change some of the attitudes and, um, notions that mistakenly are held in the greater society? Thank you.
I just wanted to add that I think notions of the model minority and Orientalism and a lot of things that really perpetuate negative stereotypes and just like this perpetual foreigner myth around API folks is that even news and media that you think is like really liberal or progressive or leftist, like also tend to get it wrong. I was thinking about how like the New York Times, when they first started, like they had terrible coverage about what was happening in China without the first outbreak of the coronavirus. They were in a sense shaming folks for using masks, and now here we are where you are highly encouraged to use a mask when you go out anywhere in public. So I don't know if I know what to say, but I think it's kind of being mindful of even like I know a lot of folks that I know like New York Times, but it also like is perpetuating terrible shit like that that like maybe doesn't seem so like insidious or dangerous right now, but can really lead to, I think, more stereotypes, more just negative impacts on the community right now.
I think one thing that I tell my students is to, to tell your own stories. I mean, mass media, that's something that's very difficult to control on your own. But one thing I tell my students is to try to create as many stories of your own to compete with the dominant narratives or the dominant stories out there. And so, because like I'm mainly working in an education setting, and that's something that I try to encourage my students. We're in a time and age where social media is like running rampant, and there's like a lot of power and a lot of I guess, in that as well. And so I feel like social media can cause like many different types of very bad stories and bad stereotypes and things like that. And that's why I encourage my students and people to participate and put out their own authentic and their own true stories to help compete with those dominant narratives. And so I feel like that's what I tell students, especially, as Pacific Islanders or Asian Americans who feel like they're being stereotyped, being racialized, give them a different story. And I think for those who are allies, to don't feed into those negative stories or those negative feedback or those negative things that are there. Don't feed to that, but promote those other positive stories that are out there. And and even promoting events like this, where we're talking about some of the struggles that different groups are going to, and just promoting those different stories, because it's very difficult to control what popular media does. But I think one strategy that I try to advise my students is to participate in it, produce as much as you can to give alternatives to those. So that way, that's not the sole dominant or the only story that's out there.
Absolutely, absolutely, Nestor. Thank you. Okay. Well, I want to take just the last minute to thank all the panelists and particularly everyone who has stayed on this call with us and who has participated in these critical conversations and difficult conversations, but they are super critical. So thank you all for joining. And if there are no other final comments from our, actually, yes, there are. Okay, so I'm going to share these with you all. In the the panel has actually compiled several resources sorry about that. several resources for Highline students. And this is not working now. Let's see. Okay. There are many resources, thanks to Lynn, who has raised these student resources at the Highline, the main Highline page, as well as CARES Act funding, the Highline Emergency Fund, the Benefits Hub, which provides emergency funding, in addition to support for housing and books. The pantry, the Highline Pantry, is having its pop-up day tomorrow, the last day for the quarter. The community pantry, there will be a pop-up, no contact way that you can pick up some food if you enter through the campus view part of campus, and that will be from 10 to 2 p.m. tomorrow. There are also Washington State and King County resources for undocumented individuals to apply for COVID-19 relief. King County is no longer taking applications for its rental assistance program, but you can sign up for updates when they are accepting applications. Lynn, do you want to mention the, say anything more about the resources for students?
Oh, okay. Yeah, you already mentioned it. Yeah, so but there are Highline Emergency Fund. They fund for books, transportation, housings, anything other than tuitions. And also right now, CARES funding is available for those who are eligible for FAFSA financial aid. So if you're eligible for FAFSA, you are eligible for CARES funding. But so when you sign up for the CARES funding, it takes like a week or more to notify you if you are eligible for that fund or not. And then oh, they have like here to Highline Emergency Fund. I'm not sure which one is which, but I'm just.
This one, this Highline Emergency Fund, I think, is through Benefits Hub.
Okay. What about the first one? Oh, the general one.
This one is the Excel spreadsheet with all the different resources.
Oh, okay. Okay, got it. Yeah. So and then the benefit okay, sorry. The Benefit Hub one is it's but a Benefit Hub can help you with a lot of things actually. So if you are planning to apply for the King County rental assistance, and if you are Highline students, Benefit Hub can also help you with applications. They can also help you with register for health insurance if you're low income, finding the proper housing for you, and if you're because when I start my food stamp program, Benefit Hub also the place where I seek help and help me filling out my application. So if you're low income and then you need a lot of resources with financial support, such as housing, transportations, health insurance, Benefit Hub is here for you. And yeah, tomorrow is pantry pop up, and then so last week I went to the pantry pop up. It's really convenient. You just open the car trunk and then they gonna put the food in the car trunk, so no contact. Really convenient. And yeah, like Nikki said, the King County rental assistant right now, they're not accepting any more application because they're doing the fundraising right now. But you can sign up, and then when they have more fun, they will let you know, and then you can apply from there.
Thank you, Lynn. Okay, and there are a number of PI, Asian American specific resources in the area, in Washington, and specifically in Seattle, and we'll share these with you. And also a number of ways to get involved and take action. This is the way we can make change, in addition to taking care of ourselves, in addition to taking care of our loved ones, also getting involved virtually right now by visiting these links Gregory, would you like to add or mention some specific organizations or work?
Yeah, I'll just particularly lift up the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective. They were the collective I mentioned earlier. Me and Mingus and some other folks in the collective have been talking a lot more about pods and alternative models to safety and security. So I would recommend specifically looking at that. And then the first one is an Asian American Justice Toolkit, which is a toolkit that was done by collective of grassroots organizations from across the country on how to actually talk about race, how to talk about gender, and actually thinking about racial justice and immigrant justice from an Asian American lens. And it's been a tool that folks have used, especially as a 101 and a way to get bring new folks into the conversation. So I'll lift up those two in particular.
I also have found the People's Collective for Justice and Liberation, because they have the town halls that they've been holding that Gregory has been a co-founder along with DJ Cotton Candy. There are many of the things that we talked about today were actually inspired by these town halls that I was really fortunate to be a part of. So it's People's Collective for JL.org. And I really encourage you, there's some great art and some, really, really extremely smart and community-minded folks that are doing great work. And so all of those town halls, I believe all those town halls are, you can view them on Zoom.
Yes, that is right.
So we still have the chat going. There is not an evaluation.
Is there one, Nestor? I don't know if you're including this with all the other Heritage Month events.
Yes, let me look for the link.
As Nestor pulls it up, I also just wanted to mention I know at this time housing insecurity and housing insecurity is a really big issue, whether it's not being able to pay your rent, even though the Washington moratorium doesn't actually help you, just means that you owe a bunch of rent when it ends. But anyways, I think a lot of folks are experiencing homelessness related to that, but also related to maybe not feeling safe in the homes that they're at currently. And so if you know anyone who is experiencing homelessness, particularly unaccompanied homelessness, which means that they're not under the care of a parent or guardian, please refer them to the Passport Scholarship. I'm actually the point person at Highline College. And so that's a scholarship that folks can get per quarter, and they can then access multiple different emergency funds for that. So I know it's a little bit of money, but it definitely is a resource there for y'all. And I think right now too, we're definitely anticipating a lot of folks experiencing homelessness and not experiencing safety in the homes that they currently live in.
Thank you, Kathy. Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you all again for joining us this evening and sticking around. I really, really appreciate everyone who stayed on this call. And please continue to be safe, stay healthy, take care of yourself. Remember, it's Mental Health Awareness Month, and continue these conversations. Tell folks about the conversations that we had today, right? Personal stories stay here, but the lessons leave. And so this is kind of one of the ways that we can do evaluations is by sharing what you learned with other folks. That's, to me, better than, I know that the maybe AANAPISI program might appreciate evaluations too, but spread the word, spread what we talked about, and organize your own events and invite us all to them. Perfect.
Feel free to email us your feedback and even use us as resources as well. I think we'll include our emails too. If you wanted to contact us or have any questions about any particular resources or have any questions that you want to ask us later on too.
Yeah, that would be great. And we can include our emails on the slides that we'll post on the website. Bye, everyone. Take care.